Dark clouds gathered over the Fulton County Superior Court, an ominous sign of the storm about to break. Tension buzzed through the corridors like static, ready to unleash a bolt of energy at any moment. Unbeknownst to the bystanders filing in that rainy morning, a dramatic confrontation was brewing inside Courtroom 4D, one that would shake the foundations of justice itself. A young black woman dressed in a pristine gray suit took her seat at the defense table, her eyes steady and calm. Little did anyone realize that this poised, seemingly ordinary defendant was no ordinary person at all. She was about to expose a judge's dark bias, detonating a scandal destined to ricochet across the state. Letitia Bell was on her way back from a late-night meeting at the state capitol building in downtown Atlanta. As the newly appointed chief legal advisor to Governor Randolph Sinclair, she had been tirelessly drafting proposals for criminal justice reform legislation aimed at creating greater transparency within the courts. It was her passion project, fueled by years of seeing systemic inequities devastate black communities. With her laptop bag on the passenger seat, Letitia navigated the winding roads that led to her modest townhouse in the suburban outskirts of the city. She barely noticed the police cruiser tailing her until the flashing lights filled her rearview mirror. Letitia eased her car to the shoulder, heart pounding from the sudden alarm. She had done nothing wrong. Her registration was current, her insurance up to date, and she certainly wasn't speeding. Yet, experience had taught her that doing everything right did not always shield black drivers from harassment. A stout officer with a badge reading Officer Blackwood approached, his eyes already narrowed and suspicious. Letitia rolled down the window and greeted him politely, handing over her license and proof of insurance before he could ask. Despite the confidence Letitia exuded, she could sense the tension radiating from the officer. He asked her a slew of questions: where she had come from, where she was going, who she worked for, and why she was out so late. Letitia maintained her composure, answering clearly and firmly. His brow furrowed deeper when she mentioned the governor's office. Perhaps he didn't believe her, or perhaps he found it audacious that a black woman would hold such a lofty position. Whatever his reason, Officer Blackwood prolonged the encounter well beyond a routine traffic stop. Suddenly, he claimed to smell alcohol in her vehicle, a baseless accusation since Letitia hadn't drunk a drop. She calmly refused to consent to a vehicle search, citing her Fourth Amendment rights. This refusal seemed to rankle the officer. Within moments, he ordered Letitia out of the car, stating she was resisting an investigation. Letitia's indignation flared, but she forced herself to remain cool. She knew her rights. She stood on the side of the highway, arms crossed, while Officer Blackwood rifled through her belongings, dumping folders and notes onto the passenger seat. She didn't want to play the "I work for the governor" card, yet she believed in the fairness of the law, believed that if she complied reasonably, the truth would shine through. But the officer's frustration only grew when he found nothing incriminating. Letitia asked if she was free to leave. Blackwood's cheeks flushed, and he stammered something about interfering with an official investigation. Before she could process what he was saying, he clamped her wrists with cold steel handcuffs and mumbled her Miranda rights in a monotone voice. Letitia's heart thundered in her chest. She felt a pang of fear, not for herself, for she was certain of her innocence, but for what this would mean if taken to court. She had worked so hard to reform the exact prejudices she was now staring down in real life. By dawn, she was processed in a local precinct, her phone confiscated and her request for a phone call delayed. She spent the night in a cramped holding cell, overshadowed by graffiti-scarred walls and the stench of stale sweat. Letitia tried to stay collected. She believed it was a misunderstanding that would clear up once she explained, but she had an unsettling premonition. Not all judges are fair, and not all truth finds immediate vindication in the courtroom. Judge Wallace Thorne was something of a legend in the local legal community. Appointed to the Fulton County Superior Court bench years ago, he had gained a reputation for delivering harsh sentences. Some hailed him as tough on crime, while others whispered about his selective sense of justice. Among the staff in the courthouse, rumors circulated of the judge's personal biases, particularly towards defendants of color. There were off-the-record allegations of racist commentary behind closed chambers, unreasonably high bails, and suspiciously one-sided rulings. Letitia had seen Judge Thorne in action a few times from the gallery. She'd studied him quietly, noting how his tone shifted when addressing white defendants versus black defendants. But Letitia never expected to find herself a defendant in his courtroom. Yet there she was, clothes rumpled from a sleepless night in a holding cell, standing behind a podium in courtroom 4D. She had no legal counsel beside her because she believed the charges would be immediately dismissed. After all, she was arrested for resisting investigation without a shred of evidence that she'd committed any crime. How could a baseless claim survive an arraignment? The moment Letitia's name was called, Judge Thorne's cold, hawk-like gaze swept over her. He glanced at her file, arching an eyebrow. "Miss Letitia Bell, you stand accused of obstructing a police officer in the course of his duties," he read aloud, his baritone resonating through the silent room. "Do you have representation?" Letitia cleared her throat. "Your Honor, I was unfairly." "Do you have representation?" he interjected, voice growing sterner. She shook her head. "I haven't had the opportunity to contact an attorney, Your Honor." "I was." "Then I suggest you obtain one," Judge Thorne said. "This court does not look favorably on self-representation in criminal matters." Letitia almost corrected him that she was, in fact, a lawyer admitted to the Georgia State Bar, but she suppressed that impulse for the moment, suspecting it would only fuel his antagonism. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to request a continuance to secure counsel." There was a flicker in Judge Thorne's eyes, something akin to glee at having power over her. "Request for continuance is noted. However, this court has the authority to determine bail based on the severity of the charges. Officer Blackwood claims you refused to follow lawful orders and acted aggressively. That indicates you may be a risk to the community." Letitia's stomach churned. A risk to the community? Over a traffic stop that the arresting officer had prolonged for no legitimate reason? She inhaled, determined to maintain her composure. "Your Honor, there's no evidence that I present any threat. I have a stable job, no criminal record. Nevertheless, you're charged with resisting a legitimate investigation," Judge Thorne said, cutting her off yet again. "Bail is set at $10,000. Next case." A wave of disbelief washed over Letitia. $10,000 for a first-time offense with no evidence of violence? She knew the typical bail for such a misdemeanor, if it even was a legitimate misdemeanor, ranged far lower. A lump formed in her throat, but she squared her shoulders. She refused to be cowed. She might have had to post bail, but she had the resources. She wouldn't rot in a cell while a biased system tried to break her spirit. Judge Thorne banged his gavel, and Letitia was escorted out of the courtroom by a bailiff. As she moved through the corridor, staff members exchanged curious glances. Letitia Bell, the governor's right-hand attorney, behind bars? No one recognized her yet, and Letitia had a sinking feeling that Judge Thorne would do everything in his power to keep her from being recognized or vindicated. She would need legal reinforcements, and fast. After Letitia posted bail, she immediately contacted two key allies, Gloria Harding, a prominent civil rights attorney, and Thomas Yun, the governor's deputy chief of staff. They met at a cozy cafe just a few blocks from the Martin Luther King Jr. Federal Building, choosing a secluded corner table where they could speak privately. Gloria was a slender woman in her late 40s, her curly brown hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She had a long history of litigating civil rights cases against systemic biases. She'd famously won a landmark case on racial profiling in traffic stops. As Letitia recounted the events of her arrest, Gloria's face hardened with anger. "This is brazen," she said. "They had no probable cause to search you, let alone arrest you. They're deliberately trying to intimidate you." Thomas, who had known Letitia since their law school days, listened quietly, his expression grim. He wore a pressed navy suit, the standard uniform of the governor's top aides. "You realize Governor Sinclair will be furious once he hears about this," Thomas said. "He's out of state on a conference right now, but once he's back, he'll want to take immediate action." Letitia nodded, letting out a breath of relief. "I appreciate that, but before we involve the governor directly, I want to proceed systematically. We need to gather hard evidence of misconduct, from the traffic stop to the judge's excessive bail. I suspect there's a pattern." Gloria tapped her pen on a notepad. "I'll file a motion to dismiss, but I doubt Judge Thorne will grant it. We might need to escalate to the Judicial Qualifications Commission if we can prove consistent bias." "But Letitia, are you prepared for how ugly this could get? They might dig into your personal life, your professional record, anything to smear you." A flicker of uncertainty passed over Letitia's face. She had worked so hard to build a spotless reputation. She was proud of her achievements and her role in shaping the governor's criminal justice reform proposals. "Yes, she said, meeting Gloria's steady gaze. I'm prepared. This fight is bigger than me. If we back down, it sends the message that people like Judge Thorne can continue bending the system to their will. Their conversation was interrupted by Letitia's phone buzzing. The caller ID was restricted, which usually meant a high-level government line. Letitia answered, her pulse quickening. It was one of the governor's senior advisors informing her that word of her arrest had reached the governor's executive office. Letitia exhaled as she listened, already anticipating the next question. Don't worry, she said after a pause. I'll handle the legal side of things. Yes, I'll keep you updated. She ended the call and looked at Gloria and Thomas. All right, it's official. The governor's staff knows. They're expecting me to keep them in the loop. But for now, it's business as usual, at least in public. Gloria glanced at her watch. I should get over to the courthouse and file those motions. Letitia, if you can secure any dash cam or body cam footage from the night of your arrest, Officer Blackwood's account will crumble if we have video evidence contradicting his claim of aggressive behavior. Thomas stood, straightening his tie. I'll work on the political angle. We'll see if there are any back channels that can expedite obtaining that footage. Letitia nodded, trying to mask the nervous flutter in her stomach. She was deeply grateful to have allies who believed in her, but she also recognized the forces arrayed against her. A tough judge with questionable ethics, a police officer possibly covering his tracks, and a system that often treated black defendants as guilty until proven innocent. Still, Letitia's resolve was a steel blade, unsheathed. She would fight, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been ground down by injustice. 2 days later, Letitia found herself stepping onto the polished marble floors of the governor's office. The Capitol building brimmed with its usual bustle. Secretaries hurried with stacks of documents. Interns scurried to deliver memos, and staffers whispered about the governor's upcoming press conference on healthcare reform. Most offered Letitia polite nods as she passed, though she noticed a few double takes, as if the rumors of her arrest were quietly circulating. Governor Randolph Sinclair was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair. He greeted Letitia with a firm handshake, ushering her into a private room lined with portraits of past governors. He closed the door, his expression grave. I heard about your situation, he said gently, motioning for her to sit in a high-backed leather chair. To say I'm shocked is an understatement. I've always known you to be dedicated, diligent, utterly committed to justice. This incident smells rotten. Letitia nodded, her shoulders rigid. She explained the details of her arrest, the baseless claims, the steep bail, and Judge Thorne's demeanor. The governor listened intently, stroking his chin. I've had concerns about Judge Thorne before, he admitted, but he's always been cunning enough to skirt formal complaints. No one has pinned him down with concrete evidence. Until now, Letitia said, her voice resolute. We're collecting everything we can, body cam footage, dash cam recordings. There must be something that proves Officer Blackwood's account is false. And once that's proven, we can shine a light on how Judge Thorne set such an unreasonable bail. This could open the floodgates to his pattern of disproportionate sentencing. Governor Sinclair leaned forward. You understand that once we publicly move against a sitting judge, it becomes a media spectacle. The press will jump on every detail, truth, or rumor. I'm behind you 100%, Letitia, but I need to make sure you're ready for the storm it'll bring. Letitia exhaled. I've thought about it, and yes, I'm ready. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who has been railroaded by a corrupt process. If I can use my position to ensure justice, then I must. The governor gave her a warm, reassuring smile. I always knew you were special, Letitia. You're the reason I have faith in our reform proposals. The fact that you've ended up in this situation is beyond ironic, but maybe it's the catalyst we need. He rose from his seat, signaling that the meeting was over. Keep me apprised. I'll do what I can behind the scenes to expedite any cooperation from law enforcement agencies. But I trust you to lead this. Speak to the press if you must, but be careful. Judge Thorne is cunning, and he'll spin anything you say. Proceed with caution, but don't let fear stand in your way. As Letitia left, she felt a buoyant sense of purpose wash over her. The governor believed in her cause, and he wasn't going to let judicial corruption go unchecked. She clutched her laptop bag tighter, thinking of the half-finished draft of the legislation she'd been working on. The question burned inside her mind. How many more people had Judge Thorne steamrolled with his unchecked power? Gloria Harding called Letitia with an urgent tone in her voice. Meet me at my office as soon as you can. Letitia obliged, navigating downtown traffic until she arrived at the multi-story law building where Gloria's firm was located. She took the elevator to the 15th floor, greeted by modern decor and a frosted glass door labeled Harding and Associates. Gloria met her in the conference room, greeting her with a tight smile. She spread out some documents across a dark mahogany table. "You're not going to believe this," Gloria said, tapping a stack of papers. "I put in a request for the dash cam and body cam footage. The police department responded that all relevant footage was lost due to technical errors." Letitia's jaw clenched. "Convenient," she said, sarcasm lacing her voice. "So that's their story." "There's more," Gloria continued, flipping to another page. "I also subpoenaed Officer Blackwood's disciplinary records. He has multiple complaints of using excessive force and racial profiling, but none of those complaints ever escalated into formal charges because of lack of evidence or missing footage. It's a pattern." Letitia sank into a chair. A wave of anger and frustration coursed through her. "So they're sweeping it all under the rug again?" Gloria's eyes blazed. "Not if we have anything to say about it. I've already filed a motion for the court to demand that the police produce any backup copies or server archives. Sometimes IT departments store these files in multiple locations. If they're lying about losing the footage, that could be grounds for sanction." Letitia took a shaky breath, massaging her temples. "And what about the hearing date? Have we heard any updates from Judge Thorne's chambers?" Gloria nodded grimly. "Yes, we've been scheduled for a preliminary hearing next week. They're moving surprisingly fast. It's almost like Judge Thorne wants to railroad this case before we can gather the evidence to exonerate you." A heavy silence settled. Letitia's thoughts turned to the men and women who faced similar injustices but didn't have a fraction of the resources she had. No high-powered attorney, no direct line to the governor, no persistent friend like Gloria. How many times had these tactics succeeded because the defendant was powerless? Before Gloria could continue, the office phone rang. She answered briefly, then turned back to Letitia with an odd look. "That was one of my associates. You're not going to believe this, but apparently there's a witness who filmed part of the incident on her smartphone. She came forward after seeing your story mentioned on local news. She claims she has footage of Officer Blackwood arresting you." Letitia's eyes widened in hope. "That's huge. If we can verify it's authentic and that it shows the officer's misconduct." Gloria's lips curved in a triumphant smile. "We might just blow this case wide open. I'll arrange a meeting with the witness immediately. This might be the crack in their armor we've been waiting for." Letitia stood, feeling renewed energy. "In the meantime, I'll speak with the governor's office and let them know we may have new evidence. They might help expedite the authenticity check." "This is it, Gloria. We're not backing down." The day of the preliminary hearing arrived faster than Letitia expected. Courtroom 4D buzzed with tension. A cluster of reporters lingered in the hallway, whispering about Letitia's position in the governor's office. Apparently, the media had caught wind of the story, framing it as a question of police overreach and judicial bias. Letitia's attorney, Gloria, stood beside her at the defense table. Across the aisle, Officer Blackwood sat stiffly in the witness row, wearing a dark uniform that glinted with medals. Judge Thorne entered, robe billowing around him like a cloak of power, and everyone rose. "Be seated," the judge ordered, his voice reverberating in the vaulted chamber. He eyed Letitia with a frosty demeanor, then addressed the room. "We are here for a preliminary hearing to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to proceed with charges of resisting a police investigation and obstruction. Counselors, please state your appearances." Gloria announced herself first, followed by the assistant district attorney, a young woman named Jenna Davies. The judge invited the prosecution to present its evidence. Davies called Officer Blackwood to the stand. Under oath, he repeated a carefully scripted narrative. Letitia was driving erratically, refused to comply with his requests for documentation, and grew belligerent when he asked her to step out of the vehicle. He insisted that he smelled alcohol and claimed Letitia had cursed at him and resisted arrest. Gloria's eyes narrowed as she listened. This was the story Letitia had vehemently denied. The stench of falsehood was thick in the air. Gloria methodically cross-examined the officer, challenging his recollection of the events. "Officer Blackwood, can you explain why there's no dash cam or body cam footage of this incident?" Gloria asked, her tone calm but piercing. The officer's jaw tightened. "Technical malfunction. All the files got corrupted. Gloria allowed a pause to hang in the air, then produced a series of documents. And is it not true that you have been the subject of multiple complaints regarding missing footage and other arrests involving black motorists? Judge Thorne frowned. Ms. Harding, we're not here to litigate Officer Blackwood's entire career. Keep your questions relevant. Gloria didn't skip a beat. Your Honor, I'm establishing a pattern. Repeated claims of lost footage under suspicious circumstances go directly to the credibility of the officer's testimony. Davies objected, and Judge Thorne sustained, preventing Gloria from delving deeper into Blackwood's record. When it was Letitia's turn to testify, she described the events from her perspective: the immediate and thorough compliance, the baseless claim that she smelled of alcohol, the drawn-out search, and ultimately her wrongful arrest. She addressed the court with the measured precision of a seasoned lawyer, but the tension in her voice betrayed the sting of injustice. Judge Thorne leaned over his bench, steepling his fingers. Miss Bell, it seems like a matter of your word against Officer Blackwood's, given the lack of official footage. Before Letitia could respond, Gloria cleared her throat. Your Honor, we have a witness who recorded part of the encounter on a smartphone. She is present in the courtroom and ready to testify. A hush fell over the spectators. Officer Blackwood visibly paled. Judge Thorne's face hardened. He peered down at Letitia and Gloria. Has this footage been authenticated? He asked, his tone skeptical. We're in the process of verifying its authenticity, Gloria replied. However, we believe it's compelling enough to warrant consideration, especially for the purposes of this preliminary hearing. Judge Thorne consulted with the ADA, who appeared caught off guard. After a moment, he said, We'll allow the witness to speak, but let me be clear. If this footage cannot be verified, it will carry little weight in this court. The witness, a middle-aged woman named Paula Milton, took the stand. She clutched her phone nervously, but spoke with conviction. She described how she'd been driving by and noticed a police officer searching a car on the roadside. Concerned by the tension, she recorded a portion of the interaction. She recalled Letitia standing calmly, her hands in plain sight, while the officer became increasingly agitated. Paula handed her phone to Gloria, who played the footage for the court. Though the audio was somewhat muffled, it clearly captured Letitia's composed demeanor while Officer Blackwood barked commands and accused her of smelling like alcohol. Importantly, it showed Letitia's repeated requests for clarification and the officer's lack of response. The silent watchers in the courtroom absorbed every second of the video. Letitia fought back a surge of relief as the truth began to emerge. Yet Judge Thorne's demeanor shifted from aloof to visibly annoyed. He cleared his throat. We'll recess for 15 minutes so I can review this footage in chambers. Court is adjourned until then. Letitia and Gloria exchanged hopeful glances while Officer Blackwood's shoulders slumped. They had exposed a sliver of doubt in the prosecution's narrative, but Letitia knew better than to assume victory. Judge Thorne had a reputation for digging in his heels. She suspected he would do everything possible to discredit the witness's footage or dismiss it as incomplete. During the recess, Letitia sat in the corridor with Gloria and Paula Milton. Reporters huddled nearby, itching for quotes. Paula looked nervous, her hands shaking slightly. I just want to do the right thing, she said. I can't stand the idea of injustice going unchecked. Gloria placed a reassuring hand on Paula's shoulder. You're brave for coming forward. This footage could be the turning point. Letitia nodded in agreement, gratitude evident in her eyes. The 15 minutes stretched to 30, then to 40. Finally, the bailiff emerged, ordering everyone back into the courtroom. Judge Thorne perched behind his bench, face impassive as the crowd settled. Officer Blackwood had resumed his seat, flanked by the ADA. Clearing his throat, the judge began. Having reviewed the footage in my chambers, I find the content inconclusive. We only see a brief moment of the encounter, and the audio is not entirely clear. It does not categorically prove that the officer's account is false. Letitia swallowed hard. She expected as much, but the disappointment still stung. Gloria stood to speak. Your Honor, this footage clearly shows that Miss Bell was calm and compliant, directly contradicting the officer's testimony of belligerent or aggressive behavior. Surely that is relevant. Judge Thorne raised a hand. Counselor, I said it was inconclusive, not irrelevant. However, for the purposes of this preliminary hearing, I find that the prosecution has met its burden to establish probable cause to proceed to trial. A murmur of discontent rippled through the room. Letitia clenched her fists under the table, anger seething. The judge continued. I am setting the trial for next month. In the meantime, Miss Bell, your bail conditions remain in effect. If you fail to comply with any court mandates, your bail will be revoked." He banged his gavel, signaling the end of the hearing. Letitia exhaled, a swirl of emotions churning inside her: frustration, anger, and a nagging sense of betrayal by a system she had dedicated her life to improving. As she gathered her belongings, Gloria whispered, "Don't be discouraged. We made progress. We'll push for a full forensic analysis of that footage, get expert testimony on its authenticity." Letitia nodded, forcing a small smile. "We're in for a fight, but I'm ready." Back at Gloria's office later that afternoon, Letitia, Gloria, and Thomas Yun convened around a large, oval conference table. A projector displayed a series of documents, including sworn affidavits from individuals who claimed similar treatment by Officer Blackwood and suspiciously harsh sentencing by Judge Thorne. Gloria's team had spent the last few weeks digging into public records, archiving local news reports, and even scouring social media posts for patterns. They found multiple cases where defendants, mostly black men and women, were charged with minor offenses but ended up with disproportionately severe sentences. In many of these cases, Officer Blackwood was the arresting officer, and Judge Thorne presided over the trials. The synergy between them was too blatant to be coincidence. Thomas, flipping through the compiled dossier, looked grim. "My God, look at this. Frank Davis, arrested for a broken tail light, ended up with a 3-month jail sentence for resisting arrest. Meanwhile, a nearly identical case with a white defendant ended in a small fine." Letitia felt a knot twist in her stomach. This was systemic corruption at its worst. A loop where an officer with a history of racial profiling funneled defendants into a courtroom overseen by a judge with a bias. Together, they perpetuated injustice and upheld each other's narratives, leaving the defendants virtually powerless. Gloria slid another file forward. "There's a pattern of lost footage, too. Over a dozen separate instances where Officer Blackwood claimed dash cam or body cam malfunctions. That's extremely suspect. And in every instance, the defendant ended up being sentenced by Judge Thorne to far harsher penalties than usual." Letitia's mind raced. "We need to get these victims to come forward as witnesses. This case isn't just about me. If we can show a consistent pattern, we might be able to get the Department of Justice involved for a civil rights violation investigation." Thomas nodded fervently. "The governor will certainly back that. But we need concrete, undeniable evidence. Allegations alone won't topple a sitting judge. That's why I've got a private investigator working to locate any possible dashcam backups," Gloria said. "Also, I've reached out to the local news station that reported on some of these arrests. They might have archived footage or interviews that never aired. Anything we can collect to build a rock-solid case." Letitia stood, unable to contain her restless energy. She paced around the conference room, her mind churning with next steps. Judge Thorne thinks he can hide behind the facade of tough on crime. Officer Blackwood hides behind his badge and the excuse of technical failures. But all it takes is one big break to bring it crashing down. "Let's not forget," Gloria added gently, "they'll fight back with everything they have, including smearing you, Letitia. They'll frame this as a personal vendetta or accuse you of using your political connections to escape accountability. Are you prepared for that?" Letitia drew a long breath. "I am. It's frightening, but I'm not backing down. This is why I joined the governor's team in the first place, to expose corruption and champion reforms. If we succeed, we won't just help me, we'll help countless people who've suffered under this broken system." Within days, Letitia's fears about a smear campaign materialized. A local tabloid-style news outlet suddenly published an article suggesting Letitia Bell had criminal connections. The piece pointed to an old neighborhood friend of hers who had served time for drug possession, insinuating Letitia was involved. It was entirely baseless. She hadn't spoken to that friend in years, and there was no evidence tying her to any wrongdoing. But the damage was done. Social media lit up with speculation, and trolls flooded her inbox with hateful messages. Some even suggested that Letitia's arrest for obstruction was just the tip of an iceberg of corruption. Letitia tried to remain composed, yet the onslaught felt overwhelming. Gloria urged Letitia to issue a strong public statement refuting the allegations. Thomas coordinated with the governor's press team, drafting a statement that emphasized Letitia's track record of service and dedication to the law. The statement also highlighted her ongoing legal fight against unwarranted accusations. Judge Thorne's next move was even more direct. From the bench, he made an offhand comment questioning Letitia's commitment to lawful conduct, which found its way into a front-page headline in the local paper. The insinuation was clear. If a judge doubts her integrity, there must be something there. Outraged, Gloria filed a motion to recuse Judge Thorne from the case, arguing that he had displayed clear bias in both words and deeds. The motion included detailed references to the patterns of disproportionate sentencing. In response, the judge simply scheduled a hearing to address the motion and assigned himself to preside over it, effectively allowing him to judge his own partiality. Letitia received the hearing date notice while at the governor's office. Thomas handed her the letter, shaking his head in disbelief. He's not even pretending to be impartial. Letitia managed a bitter laugh. He thinks his authority is absolute. Well, I can't wait to see how he tries to spin this. Governor Sinclair, who had just emerged from a meeting, overheard their conversation and approached Letitia. If you need any official statement from me, you have it. This is an egregious conflict of interest, presiding over a motion that challenges his own bias. If that's not a miscarriage of justice, I don't know what is. Touched by the governor's backing, Letitia thanked him. But she also knew that nothing short of solid evidence would make Judge Thorne step down. She and Gloria had pinned their hopes on the private investigator's search for additional dashcam backups or any new testimonies from people impacted by these malicious tactics. Still, Letitia refused to succumb to fear. As the date of the recusal hearing loomed closer, she prepared meticulously, arming herself with every piece of data, every statistic on racial disparities in sentencing, and every documented instance of missing footage tied to Officer Blackwood. If Judge Thorne wanted a showdown, Letitia was ready to meet him head-on. The recusal hearing was tense from the start. Judge Thorne sat perched behind his bench, trying to maintain an air of neutrality, though every flicker in his eyes betrayed resentment. Gloria presented a litany of reasons why the judge should step aside. His history of questionable rulings against black defendants, his openly skeptical commentary toward Letitia, and the suspicious synergy with Officer Blackwood. She cited legal precedents where judges had been forced to recuse themselves for far less. Judge Thorne listened in stony silence, occasionally interjecting to challenge Gloria's statements. At one point, he leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "Ms. Harding, are you suggesting I am racially biased? That is a serious accusation." Gloria stood firm. "Your record suggests a consistent pattern of imposing harsher sentences on defendants of color. Miss Bell's arrest exemplifies a suspicious chain of events where the arresting officer's evidence mysteriously vanished. Your Honor swiftly set a high bail and have continued to make prejudicial comments. I don't need to suggest anything. The facts speak for themselves." The judge glanced at the ADA, who, likely sensing the precariousness of the situation, maintained a guarded expression. Davies offered a neutral statement, emphasizing that the state saw no explicit evidence of racial bias, but would abide by the court's decision. It was a calculated move. If the recusal was granted, the ADA could maintain neutrality. If it was denied, the ADA could continue the prosecution under the same judge. After Gloria finished, Judge Thorne drummed his fingers on the bench. "This court has heard your arguments. However, a judge cannot be recused simply because a defense attorney disagrees with his rulings. I have served this bench impartially for years. I see no valid reason to recuse myself." Motion denied. Outrage rippled through the defense side of the courtroom. Letitia felt her pulse hammer in her temples. Gloria immediately stated for the record that they would appeal the denial to the higher court. Judge Thorne's scowl deepened at that pronouncement, as though Letitia and her team were insolent peasants daring to challenge a king. In the hallway afterward, Gloria and Letitia spoke in hushed tones. "We expected this," Gloria said, though her face was flushed with anger. "We'll file an appeal. It could take time, but it's our only shot at getting him off the bench for your trial." Letitia nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm not surprised he refused to recuse, but every move he makes just confirms his bias. He's digging his own grave." They left the courthouse amid a flurry of reporters. Cameras pointed at Letitia. She gave a brief statement, acknowledging the motion's denial but reaffirming her commitment to proving the case was rooted in injustice. The crowd pressed for details, but Letitia remained measured. She had learned long ago that every word would be scrutinized. Just as they were about to exit the courthouse, Letitia's phone vibrated. The private investigator's number flashed on the screen. She stepped aside to answer. Her eyes widened at what she heard on the other end. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling with excitement. "That's incredible news. Email us the files as soon as possible." Gloria noted Letitia's expression and raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "They found it," Letitia breathed, her face alight with hope. One of the police department's backup servers wasn't fully scrubbed. The investigator retrieved partial dashcam footage from my arrest. If it's authentic, it could prove Officer Blackwood lied. A spark reignited in Gloria's eyes. "Let's get it authenticated immediately. This might be the silver bullet we need." Outside, the press continued to swarm, but Letitia felt a renewed sense of determination surge through her veins. At last, they had a real chance to expose the truth, forcing the system to confront its own rot. Judge Thorne might have won the battle over recusal, but Letitia was about to open fire with explosive evidence. By late evening, Letitia and Gloria huddled in Gloria's office, the lights dimmed to reduce glare on the computer screen. The private investigator sat with them, transferring the newly discovered footage to a laptop. Nervous tension crackled in the air. The file started to play. The video, shot from the dash cam of Officer Blackwood's cruiser, was partially corrupted. Some frames were missing, and the audio crackled with static, but enough was intact to reveal a damning sequence of events. Letitia's vehicle was fully stopped, signals functioning properly. Officer Blackwood approached, and from the crisp audio bursts, Letitia could be heard politely handing over her documentation, not once raising her voice or refusing to comply. There was no mention of alcohol, no sign of erratic driving. Blackwood's aggression, however, was evident. He threatened Letitia with arrest almost from the outset, referencing her attitude, though Letitia's tone remained calm. In one chilling moment, Blackwood radioed another officer, saying, "I have a belligerent driver here," even as Letitia's voice contradicted that claim in real time. It was the smoking gun. Gloria paused the footage and replayed segments multiple times, her anger intensifying with each viewing. "This is outright fabrication," she said, voice trembling with outrage. "He told dispatch you were belligerent, while the camera clearly shows you were cooperative." Letitia felt her eyes sting with tears. It wasn't just about her personal vindication. It was about every person who'd been victimized by this charade. "We need to get this verified immediately," she said. "Let's have forensic experts confirm the timestamps, the cruiser ID, and ensure it's unaltered." The private investigator nodded. "I'll arrange it, but in my professional opinion, the metadata is consistent with Blackwood's dashcam logs. No sign of tampering from a third party." Gloria stood up, pacing. "Once we have the expert analysis, we'll file an emergency motion to dismiss the charges. And we won't stop there. We'll request a full-scale investigation into Blackwood's conduct. That alone will put Judge Thorne in the hot seat for how he's handled your case, and all the others." Letitia's mind drifted to the countless defendants who might have been railroaded without such crucial evidence. "This could be the start of something bigger," she said softly. "A real chance to expose corruption and possibly free people who never should have been behind bars." "Yes," Gloria agreed, determination in her eyes. "And once the governor learns about this, he'll bring the weight of his office down. We have to do this methodically, Letitia. Get the footage authenticated, file the motions, and then unleash the political pressure." A new sense of hope pulsed through Letitia's veins. She remembered the humiliation of that traffic stop, the cold metal handcuffs on her wrists. Now she had something tangible that proved her innocence, and, more importantly, proved the system was rigged against her. The puzzle pieces were finally coming together. Overnight, Letitia barely slept. She kept replaying the footage in her mind, imagining how it would unravel the false narrative spun by Officer Blackwood. She pictured Judge Thorne's stony facade cracking under the undeniable truth. This was the moment she'd been fighting for, a chance not just to save herself, but to challenge an entire structure built on injustice. A week later, Letitia's motion to dismiss landed before Judge Thorne. The hearing was standing room only, packed with reporters, community activists, and curious onlookers. The tension was palpable, like a live wire sparking in the air. Gloria presented the newly authenticated dashcam footage, with a certified forensic expert attesting to its legitimacy. The court watched in rapt attention as the recording showed Letitia calmly cooperating and Officer Blackwood inventing charges of belligerence. Whispered conversations rippled through the crowd, and Letitia felt her heart pound so loud she could hear it echo in her ears. Judge Thorne's face darkened, his fingers gripping the edge of the bench. The footage was damning. No amount of bias or twisted logic could paint Letitia as aggressive. Next to her, Gloria demanded immediate dismissal and recommended perjury charges against Officer Blackwood. Murmurs of agreement swept the room. Pressing his lips into a thin line, the judge tried to maintain composure. "This is highly unusual evidence to surface at this stage," he said, attempting to sound measured. "The court will review its authenticity. It's already verified by 2 separate forensic experts," Gloria interrupted, her voice unyielding. "The metadata matches the police department's own records. This footage is genuine, Your Honor. Officer Blackwood lied under oath, and Miss Bell has been subjected to a baseless prosecution." The ADA stood, looking flustered. "Your Honor, given this new evidence, the state concedes there may be insufficient grounds to proceed. We request a continuance to review the material further." Gloria cut in again. "We request immediate dismissal, Your Honor. There's nothing to continue. The so-called probable cause was based on false testimony." The courtroom erupted in discussion. Judge Thorne's expression revealed the battle raging within him. If he continued to push forward, it would be glaringly obvious he was ignoring clear evidence of Letitia's innocence. Reluctantly, he cleared his throat and, with a tight jaw, said, "Charges are dismissed." A wave of relief washed over Letitia, but the day's triumph didn't end there. Gloria strode forward with a new motion in hand. "Your Honor, we also request a formal investigation into Officer Blackwood's conduct, and we ask the Judicial Qualifications Commission to investigate your handling of Miss Bell's case. The pattern of lost footage, the excessive bail, the refusal to recuse yourself despite evident bias, it demands scrutiny." Judge Thorne's eyes flashed with indignation. "Counselor, that is outside the scope of these proceedings." "Actually, Your Honor," Gloria said calmly, "Georgia law permits any party to file a complaint with the Judicial Qualifications Commission at any time. We're simply stating for the record that we are doing so in open court." The tension soared to a breaking point. Judge Thorne's voice trembled with anger. He slammed the gavel. "This hearing is adjourned." He stood, nearly knocking over his chair as he stormed out of the courtroom. The press mobbed Letitia and Gloria as soon as they stepped into the hallway. Microphones and cameras thrust forward, capturing Letitia's glowing expression. "How do you feel about your name being cleared?" shouted a reporter. Letitia smiled, her voice resonating with a quiet intensity. "I'm relieved, of course. But this isn't just about me. We have evidence of systemic misconduct that must be addressed to protect everyone who sets foot in a courtroom." Less than an hour later, the governor held a hastily arranged press conference on the Capitol steps. Standing beside Letitia and Gloria, Governor Sinclair announced a formal review of Officer Blackwood's record and signaled support for a broad investigation into Judge Thorne's cases. The crowd erupted in applause as the governor embraced Letitia, affirming his faith in her integrity and praising her courage. In the days that followed, the karmic retribution hit hard. Under mounting scrutiny, Officer Blackwood was placed on administrative leave pending an internal affairs probe. Other victims of his false charges came forward, spurred by Letitia's victory. Meanwhile, the Judicial Qualifications Commission launched a full inquiry into Judge Thorne's rulings, combing through past cases where he had imposed severe sentences based on shaky evidence. A final blow came when an ethics panel found substantial reason to believe Judge Thorne had violated judicial conduct codes. Faced with the prospect of removal, he announced his resignation in a somber press release. The man who had once relished wielding absolute authority now faced public disgrace, forced to step down in shame. For Letitia, the aftermath was both validating and sobering. She remained committed to her role in the governor's administration, working tirelessly on legislation designed to enhance transparency for police and judicial conduct. Her experience became a galvanizing story for activists, journalists, and everyday citizens demanding reform. Letitia's victory was a testament to the power of truth, courage, and unity. While one corrupt judge and one dishonest officer were toppled, Letitia knew the work was far from complete. But for now, she could finally rest, secure in the knowledge that she had fought the good fight and won.